This project was kind of a happy mistake. I had started off thinking I would make a pattern out of this veneered MDF scrap I had and use a flush trim router bit to replicate the heart. I was then going to take my router bowl bit and carve out the center to make a dish. I realized though that I should have done the routing first while the workpiece was still square because it wasn't going to be easy to make a jig to hold a heart shape. Anyways, I used a piece of leftover cherry veneered MDF from a past cabinet project. It cut pretty well on bandsaw and cleaned up great with some light sanding. Then I had to cut my workpiece down to size. I had a piece of 7/4 cherry that I figured would look great for this project. The cherry was a bit too wide for my miter saw, but I was able to flip it over and I was able to get a good cut. So here I traced the heart onto the cherry. You can see I have my Freud 2-inch trim router bit out too. This cherry was pretty thick and my bandsaw blade was really dull. I wasn't concerned though because the flush trim bit would clean up all the burn marks. Now my goal with my bandsaw was to get to within about 1/16 of an inch from my line, and you can really see just how badly the bandsaw blade was burning the cherry there. I decided to fasten the pattern onto my workpiece using double-sided carpet tape. I've only done this a few times before and with nothing this thick, so I was a little bit nervous about it, and I really put a lot of tape on there, and in fact I was trying to get it off and I couldn't, so I ended up using a chisel later on. Okay, so the moment of truth. The tape held the pattern I made in place, and the bit did a wonderful job cleaning up the cherry. I was a little bit nervous doing this, and I did some really light passes before I even pushed it all the way to the pattern, and it was well worth going slow. The router bit couldn't get into the tight crease at the top of the heart, so I tapered down a scrap and wrapped it with sandpaper. This little tool is called a Simple Scribe, and it's pretty cool. I highly recommend it. I typically use it for scribing in baseboard or other molding, but it came in real handy here. The crease at the top of the heart was presenting me with the most challenges, but using one of my brass bar gauges worked pretty well. Like I said in the screen twice, it was the 1/4 inch size. And here's where I changed directions with this project. So I realized I wasn't going to be able to make an accurate jig for hogging out the center to make this a bowl. So instead, I decided to make a bandsaw box that looks like a Valentines chocolate box. So after I made this decision off camera, I switched out that old bandsaw blade for a new one I had. I don't know why I hadn't swapped it out sooner. I looked back and I had actually bought this blade off Amazon almost 5 years ago. It's made by Magnate, and it's pretty cheap, like $12 with $8 shipping, so $20 altogether. I was blown away by how much better it cut, and I'll make sure to put a link for it in the description. So same as before, I used the Simple Scribe to get my 1/4 inch thickness for my wall of this bandsaw box. And then back over to the bandsaw again, I just went around and cut out the heart. Here you can see how it will work, what they kind of slip over each other, and it was a good fit. So I put some glue into the seam where I'd cut and just used blue painter's tape to hold it all together. That red mat I'm using is just a big silicone mat. I think it's actually made for cooking, but I find it really helpful with glue because the glue never sticks to it. So, Valentine's chocolate box has like that larger heart top and bottom with a little bit of an inset. So, if you think of those Bandsaw box I made as being a little bit smaller, I needed to go and make a larger heart pattern for the top and the bottom. Now, this is another piece of MDF with a cherry veneer on it, so it kind of looks like it would be ready to go, but that's just something I'm using as my pattern. And it sanded up really well. Here I'm gluing up what will be the top and the bottoms of this box. It's cherry, but it's solid. It's not MDF. And it wasn't wide enough, so I just needed to have one center seam. They weren't bookmarked or anything, so I just kind of went with what looked nicest. So here's that larger heart pattern I made that would be for the top and the bottom. I trace it on and I take it over to the bandsaw, but since I have that new blade and it cuts so well, I decided I wasn't going to try and use my pattern bit. I just cut it out pretty close to the line, and then I took it over to my sander to clean up all the edges, make them all really nice and smooth. I think if I did it again, I might have tried putting that double-sided carpet tape between the two pieces so knew that they were like exact, because I was doing it by eye, but then you also risk trying to pull them apart because the tape actually is very sticky. So now it's time to sand everything. Typically, I sand up to about 220. I find that with the polyurethane I get a really good finish with that. And that little hand sander is great. So it uses the same sanding pads that I have for my random orbital sander, but I can stick it on. There's actually another shape you can get too where it wraps and has a little bit more of a 90 degree. So gluing this up was a little tricky because I couldn't use clamps, or at least not the way I would have usually used them. So I got the boards where I wanted them and put that big board on top so I could put a weight. When I was doing the top piece and I wanted, of course, to have it lined up, I kind of needed to make it a box, but I lifted up the lid outside piece and brought in those 1, 2, 3 blocks in a square just to kind of make sure the edges all lined up, and then stuck the weights on there and waited. So here you can see it in action. It came out really well. I decided to finish it with some wipe-on poly, which I know is not food safe, but I don't plan on actually putting food in here, even though it's a chocolates box. I think I might give this to my little girl, and I got a feeling she's probably going to put little treasures and trinkets in there. And if I'm going to make one for my little girl, I got to make sure I make one for my wife too. So my little girl is getting that cherry one, and my wife's going to get that walnut one.